Hi friends, welcome to our YouTube channel. In this video, we are going to hear about the history of cinema. Come, let's get into the video.
It turns out there was another French inventor, Louis Le Prince, who was experimenting with motion pictures and had apparently perfected the technique by 1890. But when he arrived in the US for a planned public demonstration, that same year potentially eclipsing Edison's claim on the technology, he mysteriously vanished from a train. His body and luggage, including his invention, were never found. Those years of cinema were marked by great leaps forward in technology, but not so much forward movement in terms of art. Whether it was Edison's 5-second film of a sneeze or the Lumiere 46-second film workers leaving a factory, which is exactly what it sounds like. The films were widely popular because no one had seen anything like them, not because they were breaking new ground narratively. There were, of course, notable exceptions. Alice Guy Blackie was working as a secretary at a photograph company. When she saw the Lumiere's invention in 1895, the following year she wrote, directed, and edited what many consider the first fully fictional film in cinema history, The Cabbage Fairy in 1896. But it was George Méliès who became the most well-known filmmaker as entertainer in those first few years. Méliès was a showman in Paris with a flair for the dramatic. He was one of the first to see the Lumiere cinematography in action in 1895 and immediately saw its potential as a form of mass entertainment. Over the next couple of decades, he produced hundreds of films that combined fanciful stagecraft, optical illusions, and wild storylines that anticipated much of what was to come in the next century of cinema. His most famous film, A Trip to the Moon, produced in 1902, transported audiences to the surface of the moon on a rocket ship and sometimes even included hand-tinted images to approximate color cinematography. He was very much ahead of his time and would eventually be immortalized in Martin Scorsese's 2011 film Hugo. By the start of the 20th century, cinema had become a global phenomenon. Fortunately, many of those early filmmakers had caught up with Méliès in the terms of the art of the cinema and its potential as an entertainment medium. In Germany, filmmakers like Fritz Lang and Robert Wayne helped from one of the earliest examples of a unique and unified cinematic style consisting of highly stylized, surreal production designs and modernist, even futuristic narrative conventions that came to be known as German Expressionism. Wayne's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was a Macbethy nightmare of a film about murderous hypnotist and is considered the world's first horror movie. And Lang's Metropolis was an epic science fiction, dystopolitan fantasy with an original running time of more than 2 hours. Meanwhile, in Soviet Russia, Lev Kuleshkov and Sergei Eisenstein were experimenting with how the creative juxtaposition of images could influence how an audience thinks and feels about what they see on screen, also known as editing. A relatively new concept at the time. Through a series of experiments, Kuleshkov demonstrated that it was this juxtaposition of images, not the discrete images themselves, that generated meaning, a phenomena that came to be known as the Kuleshkov effect. Einstein, his friend and colleague, applied Kuleshkov's theory to his own cinematic creations, including the concept of montage, a colleague of moving images designed to create an emotional effect rather than a logical narrative sequence. Einstein's most famous use of this technique is in the Odessa step sequence of his historical epic Battleship Potemkin. But it was the United States that was destined to become the center of the cinematic universe, especially as it grew into a global mass entertainment medium. Lois Weber was an early innovator and the first American director, male or female, to make a narrative feature film, The Merchant of Venice. Throughout her career, Weber would pursue subjects considered controversial at the time, such as abortion, birth control, and capital punishment. It helped that she owned her own studio, but it wasn't just a subject matter that pushed the envelope. For example, in her short film Suspend 1913, she pioneered the use of intercutting and basically invented split-screen editing. Others like D.W. Griffith followed suit. Though it's doubtful Griffith would have given Weber any credit. Like Weber, Griffith helped pioneer the full-length feature film and invented many of the narrative conventions, camera moves and editing techniques still in use today. Unfortunately, many of those inventions were first introduced in his ignoble, widely racist and widely popular at the time, Birth of a Nation in 1915. Griffith followed that up the next year with the somewhat ironically titled Intolerance 1916, a box office disappointment but notable for its larger than life sets, extravagant costumes, and complex storyline that made George Méliès' creations seem quaint by comparison. Weber, Griffith, and many other filmmakers and entrepreneurs would go on to establish film studio able to churn out hundreds of short and long form content for the movie theaters, popping up on almost every street corner.